How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, December 7th, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Simpson. For this episode of The Elite, I'm going to take you through the elite performances and the performances by the elite athletes from over this weekend as it came down to college football, college basketball, professional football, and of course soccer as we preview the NBA season before the preseason actually gets started. And just to kind of take you down that lane, I'll just start with the NBA just to show where the NBA is sitting right now. The first day of NBA preseason to start this 2021 NBA season. It will start on Friday. And the regular season for the NBA starts on the 22nd, so I won't get back to you on what's going on with the NBA until the 22nd, but that's currently where we stand with the NBA. Staying within basketball and jumping into college basketball. Following Thursday, just taking you through what's been going on with everything this weekend. Starting with Friday, Marquette was able to beat fourth-ranked Wisconsin 67-65 at home. Justin Lewis led the way with 18 points. Sixth-ranked Duke was able to beat Bellarmine 76-54 behind Matthew Hurt's 24 points. Eighth-ranked Michigan State remains undefeated after beating Detroit Mercy by 7 by Rocket Watts' 23 points. Led them the entire way. Ninth-ranked Creighton was able to beat unranked Kennesaw State 93-58 as they jump to 3-0 on the season. 15th-ranked UVA is now 3-1 after beating Kent State 71-64. They now sit 15th ranked in the nation, and I think they're going to come out with a new set of recruiting with a new set of college rankings today. But continuing on from Friday, 17th ranked Texas Tech was able to beat unranked Troy 80-46 behind Mac McClung's 20 points. 21st ranked Oregon was able to beat 70th ranked Seton Hall behind Eugene Omoruyi's 22 points. At Oregon now sitting at 1-1 on the season. That's what's been going on Friday. Jumping into Saturday, 7th-ranked Kansas was able to beat unranked North Dakota State. North Dakota State still has yet to win a basketball game this year. Kansas is now 4-1 after beating North Dakota State 65-61. And this time it was Jalen Wilson's 14 points and 15 rebounds that helped Kansas get to their 4-1 record. And then 10th-ranked Houston was hosted and was able to beat South Carolina 77-67. They are now undefeated at 4-0, and I think they're going to only climb up the rankings as of right now. Quentin Grimes finished with 23 points and 7 rebounds. Big win for Houston. And jumping into yesterday's matchups, because of course a lot of basketball games were postponed. Starting with 8th-ranked Michigan State, they were able to beat unranked Western Michigan 79-61. Joey Hauser led the way with 24 points and 10 rebounds. 11th-ranked West Virginia went to D.C. and were able to beat Georgetown 80-71. West Virginia with this win, they are 4-1 on the season behind Miles McBride's 17 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists. 12th-ranked Villanova was able to face off against 17th-ranked Texas and beat them by 4. They beat them 68-64. Jeremiah Robinson finished with 19 points and 8 rebounds to help Villanova jump to 4-1 on the season. With this loss, 17th-ranked Texas now drops to 4-1 on the season. They were 4-0 before. And 17th-ranked Texas Tech hosted and were able to beat Grambling State. They beat them 81-40 behind Kyler Edwards' 13 points and 11 rebounds. And then unranked Georgia Tech hosted 20th-ranked Kentucky and were able to beat them 79-62. Moses Wright led the way with 21 points and 8 rebounds. With this win, Georgia Tech is now 1-2. They lost their first 2 games and then beat Kentucky at home. And with this loss, Kentucky is now 1-3, even though they're ranked number 20 in the season. And then Duke versus Elon got postponed. And really quickly, looking out to what's been going on with college basketball today, 19th-ranked Richmond will host unranked Wofford at 2 o'clock. Both teams are 2-0, but Richmond's ranked. And then at 7 o'clock, 21st-ranked Oregon, sitting at 1-1, will host 0-2 Eastern Washington. Neither of those games on any big networks, but that's currently what's going on with college basketball. And with the NBA coming back soon, basketball will be at the forefront of everything that's going on with sports. But as of right now, not necessarily the case. Now jumping to college football to show you what's been going on this weekend. Starting with Friday, the only ranked matchup that game was between 25th ranked Louisiana Raging Cajuns, and they were able to beat Appalachian State 24-21. As Louisiana was able to go up, it would be 24-10 before Appalachian State would try to actually make it a game, but Louisiana was still able to pull it out at the very end. They're sitting at 9-1 on the season following their big win against Appalachian State. And then going down the rankings for what's been going on Saturday, starting off with number one, Alabama went to LSU when they were able to beat LSU 55-17. Mac Jones threw for 385 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air. Najee Harris ran for 145 yards and 3 touchdowns. Devontae Smith had 230 yards through the air with 3 touchdowns on 8 receptions. Alabama, with this win, still remains undefeated as the reigning college football champs. LSU dropped to 3-5 on the season. Second ranked Notre Dame was able to beat Syracuse at home. They beat them 45-21. Ian Book led the way with 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. With this win, Notre Dame is undefeated, 9-0 in the ACC, and with this loss, Syracuse is 1-10, and they're now 1-9 in the ACC following this big loss to Notre Dame. Third-ranked Clemson was able to beat Virginia Tech in Virginia 45-10. Trevor Lawrence, their elite quarterback, was able to throw for 195 yards and a touchdown as Clemson jumps to 8-1 in the ACC, now 9-1 overall. They are 1 game behind Notre Dame, and with this win over Virginia Tech, they have solidified the Notre Dame Clemson rematch ACC title game. That'll be a very big one, especially this time now that Trevor Lawrence will be here for this game. Also, fourth-ranked Ohio State was able to beat Michigan State in East Lansing today. They beat them 52-12. Justin Fields, Ohio State's elite quarterback, was able to throw for 199 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game where they kind of dominated from beginning to end. With this loss, Michigan State drops to 2-4 in the Big Ten, and Ohio State still undefeated. They are 5-0 on the season. Fifth-ranked Texas A&M went to Auburn, Alabama, and were able to beat the Tigers 31-20. Kellen Mond led the way, throwing for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. With this win, Texas A&M is 7-1 on the season, and with this loss, Auburn drops to 5-4. Sixth-ranked Florida was able to beat the Tennessee Volunteers 31-19. Kyle Trask threw for 433 yards and 4 touchdowns in a game where the Florida Gators kind of held the Tennessee Volunteers at arm's length and were able to get their 8th win of the season. They're now 8-1 in the league this year. Tennessee drops to 2-6. Ninth-ranked Iowa State hosted West Virginia and were able to beat them 42-6. Brock Purdy led the way, throwing for 247 yards and 3 touchdowns. West Virginia, they are now 5-4 with this loss. They were only able to put up 6 points against Iowa State, who's now in the top 10. And the last ranked team in the top 10, Miami, went to Duke, went to my school, and were able to beat the Duke Blue Devils 48-0. They held Duke completely scoreless for the entirety of the game to jump to 8-1 this season, 7-1 in the ACC. And with this loss, Duke drops to 2-8. De'Aaron King led the way for Miami, throwing for 248 yards and 3 touchdowns, and that's just as a passer. Continuing on, 11th ranked Oklahoma hosted unranked Baylor and were able to beat them 27-14. Oklahoma jumped out to a 10-0 lead very early on, and they were still able to outscore Baylor in the second half. Ramondre Stevens leading the way for Oklahoma. Just a big overall game as Oklahoma jumps out to 7-2, 6-2 in the Big Ten. Baylor now 2-6. 12th ranked Indiana went to Wisconsin. They went to Madison, Wisconsin. Were able to beat University of Wisconsin. They beat them 14-6. They scored a touchdown in both the second and third quarter, whereas Wisconsin scored field goals in those quarters, and they were able to kind of they were showing Wisconsin just how dominant they were, especially this season. Just a great overall game from Indiana, looking out to how their quarterback fared. Jack Tuttle would end up throwing for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. And like I just said, with this win, Indiana now jumps to 6-1 in the Big Ten, and now they're number 12. I imagine they're going to move up a bit in the ranking, but probably not, considering no ranked team above them has lost. But this is a very big win for Indiana. Coastal Carolina hosted, or 18th ranked Coastal Carolina hosted 13th ranked BYU and were able to beat them 22-17. And Coastal Carolina remains undefeated on the season. BYU with this loss, that's their first loss of the season, as they are now 9-1 on the season. Coastal Carolina, like I said, now 10-0. CJ Marable leading the way for Coastal Carolina, running for 132 yards and and 2 touchdowns on the ground. And I imagine with BYU losing, Coastal Carolina will move up, and Coastal Carolina will move up past Oklahoma State, because Oklahoma State, ranked 15th, went to Texas Christian University and lost 29-22 in a game that went down to the very end. Oklahoma State was winning 22-21 going into the fourth quarter, but then a TCU touchdown and 2-point conversion would put it out of reach, and Texas Christian was able to get their 5th win of the season. Their Max Duggan led the way. He threw for 265 yards and ran for 104 yards, and he also had 3 total touchdowns on the day. TCU Horned Frogs now with a winning record, especially after beating a ranked opponent at home while they weren't ranked themselves. 17th ranked UNC North Carolina was able to beat Western Carolina 49-9, as they scored all 49 of their points in the first 3 quarters, 42 in the first half. Sam Howell threw for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Michael Carter had 73 yards on 8 carries and 3 touchdowns on the ground. North Carolina now 7-3 on the season, as Western Carolina drops to 0-3 with this loss. 19th ranked Iowa went to Illinois, to Urbana-Champaign, and were able to beat Illinois 35-21 to jump to 5-2 in the Big Ten. Illinois drops to 2-4 in the Big Ten. Spencer Petras was able to lead the way, throwing for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then 21st ranked Marshall hosted Rice. They were 7-1 going into this game, and they got shut out by Rice 20-0. Grant Wells, starting quarterback for Marshall, threw 5 interceptions on the day. And then for Rice, their only offensive touchdown came from Jordan Myers. He had 3 yards and 2 carries. But with this win, Rice is now 2-2 on the season, and I imagine they're not gonna be ranked, but I can imagine Marshall's gonna drop out of the rankings. Also, the 22nd ranked Washington Huskies hosted unranked Stanford, and Stanford were able to beat the Huskies 31-26. As Stanford led for most of this game, Washington tried to get back into it, but it was just too late. Stanford led 31-16 at the end of the third quarter, and Washington just couldn't make up that lead. Davis Mills threw for 252 yards and a touchdown. Austin Jones had 138 yards on 31 carries and 2 touchdowns, as Stanford Cardinal were able to help their standing in the Pac-12 as of right now. Staying in the Bay Area, or they weren't playing in the Bay, but this jumping out to Berkeley. The Bears hosted 23rd ranked Oregon and were able to beat them 21-17. And at halftime, Oregon was winning this game 17-14. Cal scored a touchdown in the third quarter, and that was the only score all second half. And with this win, Cal is now 1-3 on the season. They're 1-3 in the Pac-12, and 23rd ranked Oregon they now drop to 3-2 in the Pac-12. And then last but not least, 24th ranked Tulsa was able to beat Navy 19-6. Zach Smith leading the way for Tulsa, throwing for 168 yards and a touchdown. Navy drops to 3-6 on the season, as Tulsa is now 6-1. They are 6-0 in the American Conference. And there were a couple canceled games. And looking out to yesterday's college football game, 20th ranked USC hosted and were able to beat the Washington State Cougars. Now USC is 4-0 on the season after their not so great season last year. Keaton, sorry if I butchered his name. Keaton Slovis threw for 287 yards and 5 touchdowns to help USC remain ranked. And considering some ranked opponents lost, they will move up in the rankings. And they are still sitting with the best record in the Pac-12 so far. They are sitting at 4-0. That's what college football is especially looking like this week. Week 15 won't necessarily get started until Friday, so I'll follow you up with what's been going on next weekend, following next weekend's action. And before I get into the NFL, I'm going to cover just soccer as it just happened across the 5 most important leagues. Starting with Friday, because I don't think there were any big games on Friday that I'm completely aware of that really determined any standing in the league. So I'm just going to start with Saturday. Starting with the Premier League, Manchester City was able to beat Fulham 2-0 as Raheem Sterling, the English forward, finished within the 5th minute, and Kevin De Bruyne's penalty in the 26th minute would give Manchester City what they needed to advance past Fulham. Right now, Manchester City is sitting sixth in the Premier League table with 5 wins, 3 draws, and 2 losses, with 18 points in the table, 6 points behind first place Tottenham. But it was a good win for Manchester City. Staying in Manchester, Manchester United were able to beat West Ham United 3-1. After West Ham took a 1-0 lead, a 3-goal medley from Paul Pogba, Mason Greenwood, and Marcus Rashford would give Manchester United 3 goals and 3 points to advance past West Ham. Right now, looking at where Manchester United stands, Manchester United is fifth in the table with 6 wins, a draw, and 3 losses. 1 point ahead of Manchester City and 5 behind Tottenham as of right now. Chelsea was able to beat Leeds United 3-1. Olivier Giroud was able to score the 27th minute to tie or to even up the game. Zuma's 61st minute would put them above, and Christian Pulisic's goal in the 93rd minute would give Chelsea what they needed to get past Leeds United. Chelsea right now is sitting third in the Premier League table. 11 matches played, 6 wins, 4 draws, and 1 loss. They are 2 points behind first place Tottenham and Liverpool as of right now. And then jumping to Sunday's Premier League matches, Leicester City was able to beat Sheffield United 2-1. Perez scored the first goal. McBurney tied it up for Sheffield United in the 26th minute. And Jamie Vardy's 90th minute goal would give Leicester City the 3 points they needed. Right now they're sitting in between Chelsea and Man U. Leicester City is 1 point behind Chelsea with the same amount of games played. They are 2 points ahead of Manchester United with 1 more game played. So Manchester United could have a chance to pass Leicester City with the next game they play. Right now, Leicester City is sitting in Champions League territory as of right now with this win. And Tottenham Hotspur were able to beat Arsenal 2-0. Son Heung-min and Harry Kane, the elite duo for Tottenham Hotspur, getting it done. And with this win over Arsenal, they sit atop the Premier League with Liverpool at 24 points, as Arsenal drops to 15th in the table with 4 wins, 1 draw, and 6 losses in Premier League so far. Then speaking of Liverpool, they remain at the top of the table after beating Wolverhampton 4-0. Mo Salah, their elite forward from Egypt, scoring their only goal in the first half. Wijnaldum's 58th minute goal, Matip's goal in the 67th minute, along with Semedo's own goal for Wolverhampton, gives Liverpool the 4-goal lead, and they would advance with 3 points in the Premier League. Like I just said, Tottenham Hotspur, Liverpool, Chelsea, and Leicester City are the top 4. Manchester United sitting at 5th, and Manchester City sitting at 6th. As you want to know how the top teams or how the top of the Premier League is shaking out, Man United and Man City right now look like they're on the Europa League squad. Continuing on, just to show you what's going on in the other leagues, jumping back to Saturday's matchups. Going on to the Bundesliga, Borussia Dortmund tied up with Eintracht Frankfurt. After Kamada's goal put Frankfurt up in the first half in the 9th minute, Gio Reyna, the young American, was able to tie the game up and was able to draw with Eintracht Frankfurt. And so far, following this, Borussia Dortmund, they're following a little bit out of the top for the Bundesliga, but they're sitting 4th in the table with 6 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses, as they sit 4 points in the table behind first place Bayern Munich. Speaking of Bayern Munich was able to tie with RB Leipzig 3-3. Not much traction was gained in the Champions League or in the Bundesliga following this weekend. Nkunku would score the first goal for RB Leipzig, going right around Manuel Neuer, their goated goalie. Jamal Musiala would score the first goal for Bayern. He would tie it up at 1. Thomas Müller's first goal in the 34th minute would make it 2-1 Bayern. Kluivert's goal in these to finish off the second half, it would make it 2-2 going into halftime. Forsberg's goal would put RB Leipzig up in the 48th minute, putting him up 3-2, and then Muller's second goal in the 75th minute, all goals assisted by Kingsley Coman, would help at least keep Bayern Munich ahead of RB Leipzig for the moment. Currently looking at the table, Bayern Munich is sitting by themselves at the very top of the table with 23 points. Bayer Leverkusen is sitting second in the league, especially following their win. They beat Schalke 3-0 on Sunday, and that's just looking at how the Bundesliga is setting up. With 7 wins, 2 draws, and a loss, Bayern is 1 point ahead of Leverkusen, and then Leipzig is third at 21 points. Borussia Dortmund sitting 4th in the table as they are still in Champions League territory, but they are 1 point ahead of 5th place Wolfsburg, and that's how the Bundesliga stacks up as of right now. Jumping out to Italy, Lazio was able to beat Spezia 2-1. Ciro Immobile's 15th minute goal and Milinkovic-Savic's 33rd minute goal put Lazio up to nothing in the first half. And then Zola's goal in the second half would be it would be a goal, but it wouldn't be enough to overturn the outcome. As of right now, Lazio is sitting 7th in Serie A with 5 wins, 2 draws, and 3 losses in the table. They have 17 points, which is 9 points behind AC Milan, sitting in first. Continuing on from Saturday, Juventus was able to beat Torino 2-1. Torino is up for the first 77 minutes of the game. Nkolu's 9th minute goal would put Torino up. Weston McKennie from America, his 77th minute goal would tie the game, and then Leo's Bonucci's 89th minute goal would put Juventus up, give them the 3 points in the table. Right now, Juventus is sitting 4th in Serie A as they've played as many games as Milan, Inter, and Napoli. They are sitting tied with Napoli in the table. They are 6 points behind AC Milan in the bigger picture. And then Inter Milan was able to beat Bologna. Romelu Lukaku's 16th minute goal and then Achraf Hakimi's 45th and 69th minute goals would put Internazionale above and over the top, giving 3 goals and then 3 points in the table. Inter is sitting 5 points behind AC Milan, sitting 2nd in Serie A. And speaking of AC Milan, going off to Sunday's Serie A matchups, AC Milan was able to beat Sampdoria 2-1. Kessi's penalty kick and then Castillejo's 77th minute goal would put AC Milan up 2-0, and then Edkal's goal in the 82nd minute would make it 2-1. Wouldn't overturn the outcome. AC Milan takes yet another win. They have 26 points in the table. They have 8 wins and 2 draws. They are stacking up as the best team in the league. And then Napoli tied up with Juventus after beating Crotone 4-0. Insigne, Lozano, Deb, and Patania helping them, of course, achieve this result. And as of right now, the top 4 teams through 10 matches, you have AC Milan at 1, Inter at 2, Inter Milan at 2, Napoli at 3, and Juventus at 4, all separated by 6 points between AC Milan and Juventus at the bottom. Continuing to what's going on, especially on Saturday. In Ligue 1, PSG was able to beat Montpellier 3-1. Dagba's goal in the 33rd minute would put PSG up 1-0. And then Mavididi would score for Montpellier, tied up at 1. Moise Kean's 77th minute goal tied in addition to Kylian Mbappe's 91st minute goal would put PSG above and beyond Montpellier, giving them 3 goals and 3 points in the table. With this win, PSG is now 2 points ahead of second place Lille with 9 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses in the Ligue 1 table with 28 points, 2 points ahead of Lille and Lyon. Sorry if I left Olympique Lyonnais out of the table, but that's what PSG, that's what the Ligue 1 is looking like as of right now. And last but not least, jumping out to La Liga, starting with Saturday's matchups, Real Madrid was able to beat Sevilla FC on a 55th minute own goal. But either way, after winning 1-0, Real Madrid would get 3 points in the table. And after winning the derby, Real Madrid right now sits 4th in La Liga with 6 wins, 2 draws, and 3 losses. And with that loss, Sevilla drops now to 6th in La Liga with 16 points in the table, 4 points behind Real Madrid. Real Madrid now sits 6 points behind first place Atletico Madrid, who ended up being Real Valladolid. Thomas Lemar was scored in the 56th minute, and then Llorente was scored in the 72nd minute. And Atletico Madrid continuing their amazing form, their excellent form, sitting at the top of the table. They have 1 more point than Real Sociedad, despite playing 2 less matches than them. So that's where Atletico Madrid currently sits in terms of every team in La Liga. And Barcelona ended up losing to Cadiz 2-1. Jimenez's 8th minute goal would put them up. And then it would be Pedro Alcala's own goal for Cadiz. He had an own goal which would tie it at 1. And then Negredo's 63rd minute goal would negate the own goal and give Cadiz 3 points, and Barcelona would drop to 9th in La Liga. Through 10 matches played, they have 4 wins, 2 draws, and 4 losses.
which is good enough for ninth. But a lot of the teams ahead of them have played more Champions League matchups than they have. I think another win could see them moving up a good amount of spots in La Liga. This loss was very unfortunate, but still, through 10 games, Barcelona is sitting ninth in the La Liga table, and that's what soccer is looking like following this weekend's collection of games. More games on Saturday than Sunday because, of course, some of these teams do have Champions League. Speaking of, their match day 6 of the Champions League group stage will continue tomorrow, and of course I'll give a preview as to what to look forward to for tomorrow's matchups, because that'll be very, very, very good. But then that concludes soccer for this weekend, and last but not least, I'm going to jump into yesterday's NFL matchups just to show you where every team stands, especially following this week 13 of football. And once this weekend is done, I'm going to give weekly updates as to how the playoff picture is looking for the NFL playoffs as we kind of inch into it. Starting off with the early games, because there were no Thursday night football games, the Atlanta Falcons hosted the New Orleans Saints, and the Saints were able to beat the Falcons 21-16. The Falcons scored in the fourth quarter in a game that wasn't as close as a lot of people gave it credit for. Taysom Hill came in and was able to start for the injured Drew Brees and was able to put on a show. But first, for the Atlanta Falcons, their elite quarterback Matt Ryan would complete 19 of his 39 passes, throwing for 273 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, the Falcons' elite running back Todd Gurley II finished with 16 yards on 8 carries. He also had 4 yards and 1 reception to give him 20 total yards of offense from scrimmage. Ito Smith led the team on the ground with 36 yards and 8 carries. Their leading receiver was Calvin Ridley, who had 108 yards on 5 receptions. Also, their elite wide receiver Julio Jones would finish with 94 yards on 6 receptions. Russell Gage would finish with the only receiving touchdown of the day. He had 51 yards on 4 carries. Younghoe Koo was also able to score 3 field goals for Atlanta as he broke a record for most consecutive field goals made in a season. He's having an incredible year. On the defensive side of the ball, Foyesade Olokun would lead the Falcons in tackles. He had 13 of them. Deion Jones, their middle linebacker, finished with a recovered fumble to go along with his 10 tackles on the day. And just continuing on, Grady Jarrett finished with 3 tackles for Atlanta. For New Orleans, Taysom Hill would complete 27 of his 37 passes, throwing for 232 yards. He threw for 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 83 yards on 14 carries, which would give him a total of 315 total yards of offense, and to go along with his 2 passing touchdowns. So he had a great day. Alvin Kamara would be their leading rusher. He had 88 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Michael Thomas, their elite wide receiver, would lead the way with 105 yards on 9 receptions. Traquan Smith and Jared Cook both finished with receiving touchdowns. Traquan Smith had 42 yards and 3 receptions. Jared Cook had 28 yards on 3 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Demario Davis would lead the team with 9 total tackles on the day. P.J. Williams would finish with 2 tackles to go along with his recovered fumble. And with this win, the New Orleans Saints are now 10-2 in the NFC South as the Atlanta Falcons drop to 4-8 within the same division. Atlanta they have the same record as Carolina, but I think they win the head-to-head, so Atlanta's still sitting third in the NFC South. And with this win, the New Orleans Saints, with 4 games to go, are 3 games ahead of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they're very close to not only clinching a playoff spot, but clinching the division as well. Continuing on, jumping to Miami, the Miami Dolphins hosted the Cincinnati Bengals, and they were able to, after the Cincinnati Bengals took a 7-0 lead, the Dolphins were able to take the lead in the third quarter and then just run away with it as the Bengals were just simply unable to score again. For the Bengals, their starting quarterback was Brandon Allen. He threw for 153 yards and completed a touchdown. He also threw an interception as well. Their leading receiver was Tyler Boyd, who had the only receiving touchdown of the day. He had a 72-yard touchdown strike in the only receiving touchdown as well. T. Higgins had 56 yards on 5 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Jesse Bates III led the team in tackles. He had 13 of them. Sam Hubbard had 10 tackles. Von Bell finished with 6 total tackles, and he recovered a fumble. For the Miami Dolphins, there's a lead starting quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, will complete 26 of his 39 passes, throwing for 296 yards and a touchdown. The leading rusher was Myles Gaskin, who finished with 90 yards and 21 carries, and not to mention Tua had 3 yards on the ground as well, gave him 299 yards of offense. Through the air, the leading receiver was Mike Gesicki, who had 88 yards on 9 receptions, and he had the only receiving touchdown of the day for the Miami Dolphins. And in addition to his 90 yards on the ground, Myles Gaskin had 51 yards through the air to give him 141 total yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Kyle Van Noy led the team in tackles. He had 8 of them on the day, and he finished with 3 sacks and 5 total tackles for loss. Shaq Lawson had 2 of his 4 tackles were sacks. He also had 2.5 tackles for loss in the entire game. 6 sacks for the Miami Dolphins, shared between 3 players. And Xavier Howard and Nick Needham were also able to log interceptions. Nick Needham had 1 tackle. Xavier Howard ended up with 4 tackles on the day. So a great defensive performance from the Dolphins, keeping the Cincinnati Bengals to 7 total points. And right now, with this win, the Miami Dolphins are sitting at 8-4. They are second in the AFC East. The Buffalo Bills have yet to play, but the Miami Dolphins are sitting half a game behind the 8-3 Bills at 8-4. And with this loss, the Cincinnati Bengals are now 2-9-1 as they still have the worst record in the AFC North. They're definitely eliminated from playoff contention, and they are about, if I can do this correctly, they're about 3.5 games behind the Baltimore Ravens right now, following Week 13 of the NFL season. Jumping to New York, the New York Jets, who coming into this game had not won a football game, they hosted the Las Vegas Raiders, and this game went all the way down to the last play of the game, where the Las Vegas Raiders would pull away their 7th win of the season, as the Jets still remain scoreless after 12 games this season. For them, their starting quarterback, Sam Darnold, would throw for 186 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. He also ran for 26 yards and a touchdown, which would give him a total of 212 total yards of offense and 3 touchdowns. Ty Johnson was their leading rusher. He had 104 yards and 22 carries and a touchdown. And Josh Adams had 74 yards on 8 carries for the New York Jets. Through the air, their leading receiver was Jamison Crowder, former Duke player. He had 47 yards on 5 receptions. He had both of the receiving touchdowns for the New York Jets. On the defensive side of the football, Neville Hewitt finished with 12 total tackles, as he finished with a sack as well. Marcus May had 3 tackles. He also recovered a fumble. Speaking of fumbles, Sam Darnold, in addition to having 3 total touchdowns, he threw an interception. He also lost 2 fumbles. He had 3 touchdowns and 3 lost turnovers on the day for the New York Jets. And then through the air, Arthur Mole, sorry if I butchered your name, he finished with the only interception of the day for the New York Jets, as they ended up getting really close, but the Raiders would pull away with it. For the Raiders, their starting quarterback, Derek Carr, would complete 28 of his 47 passes, throwing for 381 yards, throwing for 3 touchdowns and a pick. He also ran for 5 yards on the ground on 2 carries to give him yet another touchdown. That would give him 4 total touchdowns on the day, and to go along with his 1 interception, Derek Carr had an overall great game. Devontae Booker was their leading rusher. He had 50 yards on 16 carries. Through the air, their leading receiver was Darren Waller, who had 200 yards on 13 receptions and 2 touchdowns through the air. Also, Henry Ruggs III had 84 yards and 3 receptions and a touchdown, as they had the 3 receiving touchdowns for Las Vegas, as Derek Carr was responsible for all of them. And then at the end of the day, with this win, the Las Vegas Raiders, they currently sit second in the AFC West. They are 4 games behind the reigning 2020 Super Bowl champs, Kansas City Chiefs. And it's sitting at the bottom of the AFC East with an 0-12 record. You'll find the New York Jets, and with the and still following this, they still have yet to win a game. They still have the worst record in the NFL right now, as they are first in the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes, and in terms of getting the number 1 pick for the 2021 NFL Draft. Jumping out to Houston, the Houston Texans host the Indianapolis Colts, and the Colts were able to get the last laugh. The Colts, as the Colts led the Texans, 24-20 in the first half. The only score of the second half was a safety forced by forced by Indianapolis Colts, sacking Deshaun Watson in the end zone to give him a 6-point lead that the Colts would just run away with. For the Texans, their elite starting quarterback, Deshaun Watson, would complete 26 of his 38 passes, throwing for 341 yards and a pick. He ran for 38 yards and a touchdown, which would give him a total of 379 total yards of offense. And to go along with his only rushing touchdown, that was his only touchdown of the day. David Johnson was their leading rusher. He had 44 yards and 10 carries and a touchdown. The leading receivers were Kiki Kuti, who had 141 yards on 8 receptions. Chad Hansen had 101 yards on 5 receptions. Brandon Cooks had 65 yards on 5 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, in addition to, and also Deshaun Watson would lose a fumble as well. 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions for him, or 2 turnovers, a fumble and an interception. On the defensive side of the ball for the Houston Texans, Tyrell Adams would be their leading tackler. He had 12 of them on the day. Their go-to defensive end, J.J. Watt, would finish with 6 tackles, one of them being a sack. He had 4 tackles for loss in the entire day. And looking at the Indianapolis Colts, their starting quarterback, Phillip Rivers, he would complete 27 of his 35 passes, throwing for 285 yards and 2 touchdowns. He ran for -2 yards, so that would give him 283 total yards from scrimmage. Jonathan Taylor would be their leading rusher. He had 91 yards and 13 carries. Nyheim Hines would finish with a rushing touchdown as he had 10 yards on 6 carries. Through the air, T.Y. Hilton was their leading receiver. He had 110 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. And then Jonathan Taylor, in addition to his 91 yards on the ground, he had 44 through the air, which would give him 135 total yards of offense. And that would end his receiving touchdown would be his only touchdown of the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Anthony Walker would be their leading tackler. He had 11 total tackles, and he also recovered a fumble. Their elite linebacker, Darius Leonard, would finish with 6 tackles on the day. Justin Houston finished with 4 tackles and 3 sacks. DeForest Buckner had 4 tackles and 2 sacks. Those are the only 2 players that had sacks on the Indianapolis Colts, and Kenny Moore II would end up logging an interception to go along with his 8 total tackles on the day. With this win, the Indianapolis Colts are sitting 3rd in the AFC South with the same record as the Tennessee Titans, but the Titans win the head-to-head, so the Colts are sitting 2nd, and sitting in 3rd in that division are the 4-8 Houston Texans, who look as though they are not going to win their division. But I think it's still mathematically possible for them to clinch a playoff spot as of right now. But like I said, big win in the division for the Indianapolis Colts, much needed. Jumping out to Tennessee to look at the team that's leading that division. The Tennessee Titans hosted the Cleveland Browns, and they were so overwhelmed in the first half they just simply couldn't come back. The Browns beat the Titans 41-35 after leading the Titans 38-7 at the end of the first half. The Titans would try to come back in the fourth quarter, but it just wouldn't be enough as the Browns had gone up by so much initially that the Titans were just unable to pull off the comeback. For the Titans, their starting quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, would throw for 389 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. On the ground, their elite running back, Derrick Henry, would finish with 60 yards on 15 carries, and Jeremy McNichols would finish with the only rushing touchdown for the Titans. He had 2 yards on 2 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, their leading receiver was Corey Davis, who had 182 yards on 11 receptions and a touchdown. A.J. Brown had 87 yards and 4 receptions. Michael Pruitt had 22 yards on 1 reception and a touchdown, and Cameron Batson had 14 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. Those are the 3 receiving touchdowns for the Titans. A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry both lost fumbles for the Tennessee Titans. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Malcolm Butler would be their leading tackler. He had 8 tackles on the day. And Kenny Vaccaro would end up recovering a fumble as he had 6 tackles as well on the day. And looking at how the Cleveland Browns fared, their starting quarterback Baker Mayfield would complete 25 of his 33 passes, throwing for 334 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had 5 yards on the ground as well to give him 339 total yards, but he had a day. Nick Chubb was their leading rusher. He had 80 yards on 18 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, their leading receiver was Rashard Higgins with 95 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. Donovan Peoples-Jones had 92 yards on 2 receptions and a touchdown. Jarvis Landry had 62 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. Big game all the way around. And even Baker Mayfield had a 6-yard reception on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Andrew Sendejo would lead the team in tackles. He had 8 of them on the day. Carl Joseph would recover a fumble, and that would go with his 3 tackles. And also Kevin Johnson recovered a fumble, and that would just go with his 3 tackles on the day. Their elite defensive end, Myles Garrett, would finish with 2 tackles, one of them being a sack on the day. MJ Stewart Jr. would finish with an interception as he had 3 tackles. With this win, the Cleveland Browns are 9-3. They have the second best record in the AFC North, as they are 2.5 games behind the 11-0 Pittsburgh Steelers. And with this loss, the Tennessee Titans still have the same record as the Indianapolis Colts as they try to create that game of separation. But this loss just brought them right back to having the same record, but they win the head-to-head, so Tennessee's still sitting at the top of their division by a technicality, or just by head-to-head. Jumping out to Chicago, the Bears hosted the Lions and lost 34-30. This game was very close. This one will go all the way down to what would be the final play. The Lions were down 30-20 at one point, but a Marvin Jones touchdown with 2 minutes left, and then an Adrian Peterson 5-yard touchdown would give the Lions their 5th win of the season. Looking out to how the Bears fared, their starting quarterback Mitch Trubisky would throw for 267 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, their leading rusher was David Montgomery, who had 72 yards on 17 carries and 2 touchdowns. He had a 39-yard receiving yards through the air to give him 109 total yards of offense. Also, Cordell Patterson had 59 yards on 10 carries and a touchdown. And he also had 4 receiving yards to give him 63 total yards of offense. That's how the Bears' offense was looking. Also, Allen Robinson II had 75 yards and 6 receptions. Cole Kmet had the only receiving touchdown for the Bears. He had 37 yards on 5 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Roquan Smith finished with 9 total tackles on the day as he led the team. Not much going on for the players outside of him, as it was a very big offensive game for both sides. But Bilal Nichols was able to record an interception to go along with his 4 tackles and sacks, so he had a good game. Looking at how the Lions fared, their starting quarterback Matt Stafford would complete 27 of his 42 passes for 402 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. On the ground, Adrian Peterson, their future Hall of Fame running back, finished with 57 yards on 16 carries and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, their leading receiver was Marvin Jones Jr., who had 116 yards and 8 receptions, and a touchdown. TJ Hawkinson had 84 yards on 7 receptions. Quintez Cephas had 63 yards on 2 receptions and a touchdown. Danny Amendola had 62 yards and 3 receptions, and then Jesse James had 9 yards on his only reception, but his only reception was a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Jamie Collins Sr. led the team with 10 total tackles. John Pennicini would recover the only fumble of the day, as he had 3 tackles for him. With this win, the Detroit Lions are now 5-7. They have the same record as the Chicago Bears, but I think the Chicago Bears have a better division record. So the Bears have the 3rd best record in that division, 1 game behind the Minnesota Vikings as the Detroit Lions. They both sit with the same record at the bottom of their division. And both teams are 9 games behind the Green Bay Packers, sitting at the very front of that division. Continuing on, jumping out to Minnesota, the Minnesota Vikings hosted the Jacksonville Jaguars, and in overtime, thanks to a field goal, were able to give the Jaguars their 11th loss of the season. This game was a very entertaining one, as the Jacksonville Jaguars were up 16-6 at one point, but they just couldn't finish out with the win. Looking at how they fared, their starting quarterback Mike Glennon would throw for 280 yards with a touchdown and 2 interceptions. On the ground, James Robinson led the way with 78 yards on 18 carries and a touchdown. He also had 30 yards through the air to give him 108 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Colin Johnson, who had 66 yards on 4 receptions, and their only receiving touchdown went to Laviska Shenault Jr., who had 38 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Joe Schobert would finish with 12 tackles on the day. He led the team. He had a sack as well. As Dwayne Smoot had 2 tackles. He led the team he had 2 sacks. Led the team in sacks. He had 4 tackles on the day. Miles Jack was able to record 11, and he also recovered a fumble. Josh Jones had 10 tackles as well. Looking at Joe Sherwood would also finish with a 43-yard pick six. I'm sorry if I skipped over him, to go along with his 12 tackles and sack. So he had a pretty big game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. For the Minnesota Vikings, their starting quarterback Kirk Cousins would complete 28 of his 43 passes, throwing for 305 yards and 3 touchdowns and a pick. On the ground, their leading rusher was Dalvin Cook, who finished with 120 yards on 32 rushes. He also finished with 59 yards through the air on 6 receptions to give him 179 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Justin Jefferson, who had 121 yards on 9 receptions and a touchdown. Adam Thielen had 75 yards with 8 receptions and a touchdown. And C.J. Ham finished with 12 yards on 1 reception, and that reception was a touchdown on the day. On the defensive side of the ball for the Vikings, Eric Wilson and Todd Davis both split with 11 tackles each, led the team in tackles or double-handedly. They did it by themselves. Harrison Smith finished with 6 tackles and half a sack as their elite safety helped lead them to yet another win. Jordan Brailford, he would finish with 2 tackles on the day as he finished with a recovered fumble, and then Cameron Dantzler would finish with 4 tackles as he recovered a fumble himself. Harrison Smith, in addition to finishing with 6 tackles, would finish with an interception, and Cameron Dantzler, along with his recovered fumble, would finish with an interception. With this win, the Minnesota Vikings are now 6-6, and they are sitting second in the NFC North behind the Green Bay Packers. With 4 games left, they are 3 games behind the Packers. And looking at the AFC South, the Jacksonville Jaguars at 1-11 are sitting at the bottom of that division, 3 games behind third place Houston Texans. And with another loss next week, they could secure the worst record in their division with 3 games left following that. Continuing on with what's going on in the NFL, jumping out to Phoenix, the Arizona Cardinals hosted the Los Angeles Rams, and the Rams were able to beat the Cardinals 38-28. This was yet another game where the Rams kind of kept this game out. They kept this game at arm's length. The Cardinals were unable to really get super close. The closest they got was 24-21, but the Rams were able to create that separation and get this win. For the Cardinals, just to start off, their starting quarterback, reigning offensive rookie of the year, Kyler Murray, completed 21 of his 39 passes, throwing for 173 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He ran for 15 yards on the ground to give him 188 yards of total offense. Kenyon Drake was their leading rusher with 49 yards and 10 carries, and he had a touchdown on the ground. Through the air, the leading receiver was Dan Arnold, who had 61 yards and 2 receptions, and both of his receptions were touchdowns. DeAndre Hopkins, their elite wide receiver, had 52 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Budda Baker would be their leading tackler. He had 12 tackles on the day. Chris Banjo had 10 of them. Trent Sheffield was able to recover a fumble, and that would go along with his 2 tackles. Their elite cornerback, Patrick Peterson, finished with 5 tackles. It just wasn't enough for the Arizona Cardinals. For the Los Angeles Rams, their starting quarterback, Jared Goff, would complete 37 of his 47 passes, throwing for 351 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, Cam Akers was their leading rusher. He had 72 yards on 21 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, he had 22 yards on 1 reception, which would give him 94 yards on the day. Darrell Henderson Jr. had 49 yards on 3 rushes and a touchdown. Jared Goff, in addition to his 351 yards, he ran in a touchdown. He had 1 yard on 4 carries, which would give him 352 yards and 2 total touchdowns from scrimmage. Robert Woods was their leading receiver. He had 85 yards and 10 receptions, and Cooper Kupp had 73 yards and 8 receptions. Tyler Higbee was the only player with a touchdown. He had 24 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Troy Reeder led the team with 10 tackles by himself. Troy Hill was able to finish with 4 tackles. He had a pick 6 for 35 yards. Last but not least, Greg Gaines was able to recover a fumble. Their go-to defensive tackle, Aaron Donald, finished with 3 tackles on the day, one of them being a sack. Jalen Ramsey, their elite corner, would finish with 2 tackles as well. And with this win, the Los Angeles Rams are now 8-4, sitting at the top of the NFC West with a tiebreaker over Seattle. And with this loss, Arizona sits 3rd in the NFC West with a 6-6 record. They now trail both Seattle and Los Angeles by 2 games thus far in the season. And jumping out to Seattle, the Seattle Seahawks hosted the New York Giants and lost 17-12 as the Giants took over in the third quarter. They scored 2 touchdowns, and somehow the Seattle Seahawks were unable to stop the New York Giants yesterday. For the Seattle Seahawks, their elite quarterback Russell Wilson would complete 27 of his 43 passes, throwing for 263 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. He also added 45 yards on the ground, which would give him a total of 308 yards of offense. Chris Carson was their leading rusher with 65 yards on 13 carries. Through the air, DK Metcalf is their leading receiver. He had 80 yards on 5 receptions. Chris Carson, in addition to his 65 yards on the ground, finished with 45 yards in the air and a touchdown, the only receiving touchdown, the only offensive touchdown for the Seattle Seahawks. He would finish with 110 yards of offense, and Tyler Lockett had 63 yards on 6 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Jamal Adams and Jordan Brooks would both lead the way with 11 tackles. Jamal Adams, the Seattle Seahawks elite safety, also finished with a sack. Bobby Wagner, the Seahawks elite linebacker, finished with 6 tackles on the day. And then looking and through the air, Quandre Diggs finished with the only interception of the day to go along with his 3 tackles. For the New York Giants, their starting quarterback Colt McCoy would complete 13 of his 12 passes, throwing for 105 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. On the ground, Wayne Gallman was their leading rusher. He had 135 yards on 16 carries. And also Alfred Morris finished with 39 yards on 8 carries, and he had the only rushing touchdown of the day. Big game for him. He also had 6 yards through the air as he recorded a receiving touchdown as well. He had 6 touchdowns on 1 reception. So this is definitely his game to help them overcome the Seattle Seahawks. The leading receiver was Evan Ingram, who had 32 yards on 4 receptions, but they were still able to get the win. On the defensive side of the ball, Blake Martinez was their leading tackler. He had 10 of them on the day. Tay Crowder and Jabril Peppers finished with a sack. Leonard Williams had 3 total tackles. He had 2.5 sacks on the day for the New York Giants as he had a big game. Darnay Holmes would log the only interception of the day for the New York Giants. And with his win, the Giants are now 5-7 in the NFC East. They have the best record in that division, at least until Washington plays. And with this loss, Seattle, because they lost the head-to-head to the Rams, the Seahawks are now sitting second in the NFC West with an 8-4 record following this loss to the New York Giants. Jumping out to Los Angeles, the Chargers hosted the New England Patriots and got completely blown out. Not only blown out, they got blanked 45-0. And looking at how the Chargers fared, their starting quarterback Justin Herbert would complete 26 of his 53 passes, throwing for 209 yards. He threw 2 interceptions. On the ground, their leading rusher was Austin Eckler, who had 36 yards on 8 carries. Through the air, Keenan Allen was their leading receiver with 48 yards on 5 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Kenneth Murray Jr. finished with 14 total tackles. He had a sack on the day as well. He was the only player to log a sack for the Los Angeles Chargers as they weren't getting anything going defensively. For the New England Patriots, their elite starting quarterback Cam Newton would complete 12 of his 19 passes, throwing for 69 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 48 yards on 14 carries, which would give him 117 total yards of offense, and with his 2 rushing touchdowns would give him 3 total touchdowns on the day. And he had no turnovers, and he's had 3 touchdowns. Big game for Cam Newton. The leading rusher was Damian Harris, who had 80 yards on 16 carries. And through the air, Gunnar Olszewski was their leading receiver. He had 38 yards on 1 reception, and that 1 reception being a touchdown. Also, N'Keal Harry had the other receiving touchdown. He had 15 yards on 2 receptions, and one of the receptions was a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Adrian Phillips was their leading tackler. He had 12 tackles on the day. Adam Butler and Lawrence Guy both finished with a sack on the day with Dietrich Wise Jr. J.C. Jackson and Chase Winovich ended up logging interceptions. J.C. Jackson had 3 tackles to go along with his interception. Chase Winovich had 3 tackles to go along with his interception. It was a good overall game. And even Gunnar Olszewski would finish with a punt return touchdown. But with this win, with this 45-0 win, the New England Patriots at 6-6 currently sit 3rd in the AFC East, 2 full games behind the Miami Dolphins. And with this loss, the Los Angeles Chargers are 3-9 in the AFC West, one game behind the third place Denver Broncos, and they are 8 games behind the first place Kansas City Chiefs so far this season. Continuing on, jumping out to Lambeau, the Packers hosted the Philadelphia Eagles and were able to beat them 30-16. As the Packers basically dominated this game from beginning to end. The Eagles scoring most of their points in the fourth quarter on garbage time, really. For them, Carson Wentz would get the start. He would complete 6 of his 15 passes, throwing for 79 yards. He ran for 18. That would give him a total of 97 total yards of offense. But eventually, Jalen Hurts would take over his starting position. He would complete 5 of his 12 passes, throwing for 109 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. He added 29 yards on the ground to give him 138 total yards of offense. Miles Sanders was the leading rusher for Philadelphia as he had 31 yards on 10 carries. Their leading receiver was Dallas Goedert, who had 66 yards on 5 receptions. Greg Ward finished with 57 yards on 3 receptions. He had the only receiving touchdown for the Eagles. On the defensive side of the ball, Alex Singleton was their leading tackler. He had 12 of them on the day. TJ Edwards finished up with a sack. Him and Jamon Hargrave would have the only 2 sacks of the day for the Eagles. And for the Green Bay Packers, their goated quarterback Aaron Rodgers would complete 25 of his 34 passes, throwing for 295 yards and 3 touchdowns. On the ground, Aaron Jones would finish with 130 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown. Devontae Adams would finish with 121 yards on 10 receptions and 2 touchdowns. Big game for him individually as well. Robert Tonyan would finish with 39 yards on 4 receptions for the Green Bay Packers as well. On the defensive side of the ball for the Packers, Christian Kirksey would lead the team with 7 tackles of his own. Dean Lowry would finish with 6 tackles as he logged a sack. Zadarius Smith and Rashawn Gary both finished with a sack and a half each. Rashawn Gary had 4 tackles on the day. Zadarius Smith had 3. And Darnell Savage, in addition to his 2 tackles, would finish with an interception on the day, and he returned it for maybe 4 yards. With this win, the Green Bay Packers sit atop the NFC North with a 9-3 record, 3 games better than Minnesota with 4 games left to play. So their playoff hopes are looking very they're looking very possible. And looking in the NFC East, the Philadelphia Eagles now drop to 3rd in that division with a 3-8-1 record. They're half a game behind the 4-7 Washington football team, and a game and a half behind the 5-7 New York Giants this season, especially following this loss. Last but not least, taking you to last night's Sunday night football matchup, the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, hosted the Denver Broncos, and were able to beat them 22-16. As Denver took an early lead, and then Kansas City kind of came back in the second half and were able to just take over this game and win it. For the Broncos, their starting quarterback Drew Lock would complete 15 of his 28 passes, throwing for 151 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. On the ground, Drew Lock also ran for 9 yards. That'll give him 160 total yards of offense. Melvin Gordon III finished with 131 yards on 15 carries on the ground. Also, he had 11 yards through the air to give him 142 yards of offense. Noah Fant was their leading receiver. He had 57 yards on 4 receptions. And Tim Patrick had 44 yards on 4 receptions with both of the receiving touchdowns of the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Kareem Jackson was their leading tackler. He had 10 tackles on the day. And just Denver had a pretty good defensive game, but it just wasn't enough to contain the entirety of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. For the Chiefs, their elite quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, would complete 25 of his 40 passes. He threw for 318 yards and a touchdown. In addition to the 318, he ran for 26 yards on 4 carries. That would give him a total of, if I'm getting this correct, 344 total yards of 344 total yards of offense. Le'Veon Bell was their leading rusher. He had 40 yards on 11 carries. Tyreek Hill had 30 yards on the ground to add on to his 58 yards to the air, which would give him 88 yards of total offense. Travis Kelce was their leading receiver. He had 136 yards on 8 receptions, with Patrick Mahomes' only passing touchdown of the day. And also on the defensive side of the ball, Tyrann Mathieu and Anthony Hitchens would finish with 7 tackles each, both leading the team. And then continuing on, Tyrann Mathieu would finish with 2 interceptions on the day for the Kansas City Chiefs to help them get this win. With this win, Kansas City is sitting with an 11-1 record in the AFC West. They have the second best record by half a game to the undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers. And with this loss, the Denver Broncos are now 4-8, sitting third in that division. They currently sit a game ahead of the Chargers, and they are 3 games behind the Las Vegas Raiders. So right now, their chances of making the playoffs aren't looking very likely. And to finish off this week of football, let's finish off week 13. Tonight, the Pittsburgh Steelers will face off against the Washington football team. Washington is 4-7 on the season. If they win this game, they will retain their lead in the NFC North. And the Steelers are right now 11-0, competing with the Kansas City Chiefs for the best record in the AFC. A win here could most definitely help them inch one game closer to the best record in the conference. And and then the Buffalo Bills will play the 49ers. The 8-3 Buffalo Bills are looking to take on the 5-6 Niners, who won the NFC Championship last year. That game is going to be on ESPN, ABC, and the Cowboys will take on the Ravens tomorrow night. But that concludes an entire weekend of football. Once again, today is Monday, December 7th, 2020. Out here in this quarantine, I'm James Sims. I hope all is well, and thank you once again for listening to my entire 59-minute piece. I'll catch you tomorrow following these NFL scores and to preview Champions League Day 6. But with that said, I hope all is well. Thanks once again for listening to my piece, and peace out.